The turbulence hit the shuttle like a hammer wrapped in static. Eddie Ward gripped the yoke of the second chance, his knuckles turning white inside his worn flight gloves. Outside the reinforced expanse of the cockpit canopy, the atmosphere of Helios B was a bruising shade of violent violet and bruised orange, a toxic soup of gases that screamed against the hull. Lightning, thick as tree trunks, arced across the clouds, illuminating the scratched metal of the dashboard for split seconds before plunging the cockpit back into the dim glow of the instrument panels. Inside the passenger hold behind him, the sound of retching competed with the roar of the atmospheric stabilizers. He was hauling a crew of 6 deep gas miners back to Harbor 9. They were finished with a 3-month rotation pockets full of hazard pay and bloodstreams full of cheap synthetic alcohol. They were loud, they smelled like sulfur and bad decisions, and they were currently paying Eddie's rent. "Hey, driver!" "Hey!" One of them bellowed over the intercom, his voice slurring. "You trying to shake the lunch out of us, smooth it out." Eddie did not toggle the comms to reply. He adjusted the thruster output, his eyes scanning the magnetic field density charts. Smooth was not an option when flying through an ionic shear storm. He just needed to get them to the dock without fusing the main intake valves. He checked the fuel gauge. It was hovering just above the red line. Typical. He did the mental math. The fare from this run would cover the docking fees, the fuel refill, and the overdue notice on his apartment unit. That left him with maybe 50 credits. 50 credits to buy a birthday present for a girl who deserved the entire galaxy. He sighed, the sound lost in the groan of the ship's metal frame. His right hand left the throttle for a second to rub his right thigh. It was an unconscious habit. His fingers traced the cold, hard line where flesh met the composite alloy of his prosthetic leg. The phantom itch was bad today. It always got bad when the electromagnetic interference spiked. It felt like the nerves were trying to reconnect to a limb that had been incinerated 5 years ago at the Vega Gate. A chime cut through the static. It was the priority channel from his personal comms. Eddie tapped the receiver, and the chaotic storm outside seemed to fade away. A holographic projection flickered into existence on the dashboard. It was grainy and blue-tinted, but it was the most beautiful thing in the universe. "Daddy!" Mia was 7 years old, though her eyes often looked older. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that was already unraveling strands, sticking up in every direction. She was holding something close to the camera lens. "Hey, kiddo," Eddie said, his voice instantly softening the grid of the pilot vanishing. "I am on final approach. Just fighting a little weather. Are you safe at the apartment?" "I am safe," she said. She pulled back to reveal what she was holding. It was a complex piece of origami folded from silver packing foil. It was sharp, angular, and aggressive. "Look, I made a Fenry interceptor. The wings move." Eddie felt a cold spike in his chest that had nothing to do with the storm. He forced a smile. "That is very detailed, Mia. Where did you see a ship like that?" "I saw it in the history vids," she said innocently, tilting the little silver ship. "And I can hear them sometimes, in the hum of the station. They sound different than the human ships. Human ships go thrum-thrum, but the Fenry engines go shh-zing." She was doing it again, hearing the music of the machines. The doctors called it hypersensitivity. Eddie called it terrifying. "Put the warship away, Mia," Eddie said, trying to keep his tone light. "I will be home in 2 hours. Do you want noodles for dinner?" "Spicy noodles. Mild noodles. You are 7. "You are no fun," she giggled. "Be careful, Daddy. The sky is angry today. The sky and I are old friends. Out." The hologram faded. Eddie's smile dropped instantly. He rubbed his leg again, harder this time. Fenry interceptors. He hoped she would never see a real one. He hoped she would never know the sound they made when they opened fire on a squadron that had already surrendered. "Station control to second chance." The voice of the Harbor 9 traffic controller crackled in his ear, breathless and sharp. This was not the usual board drone of the docking authority. "This is Second Chance," Eddie replied, gripping the yoke as a crosswind slammed the shuttle sideways. "I am a little busy keeping this brick in the air control. If this is about the late permit fee, put it on my tab." "Negative, Second Chance. We have a situation. Long-range sensors just picked up an unidentified life pod, dropping out of decaying orbit. It is caught in the shear layer. Coordinates 209 by 5. You are the only vessel in range with a grapple rating high enough to snag it." Eddie looked at the fuel gauge. "I am running on fumes control. And I have passengers." "They are going to die, Eddie," the controller said, dropping the formalities. "Trajectory analysis says the pod will implode from pressure in 10 minutes. We are tracking a life sign. One soul on board." One soul. Eddie closed his eyes for a heartbeat. He hated that phrase. It was pilot code. It stripped away politics, species, and rank. It just meant someone was alive in the dark, and they would not be alive much longer without help. 10 minutes, Eddie muttered. He toggled the intercom to the passenger hold. "Listen up back there. We are taking a detour. Strap in and grab a vomit bag. It is going to get bumpy." He did not wait for the complaints. He banked the Second Chance hard, to port ignoring the protesting scream of the starboard engine. The descent into the lower storm layer was a nightmare. The lightning was constant, now, blinding flashes that left purple spots in Eddie's vision. Rain, heavy with metallic isotopes, hammered against the canopy like machine gun fire. "I see it," Eddie said, narrowing his eyes. Ahead, spinning wildly in the turbulence, was a pod. It was scorched black, trailing smoke, tumbling end over end. It was not human design. The geometry was too sharp, the alloy too dark. "Control, that is not a standard life pod," Eddie warned. "Does it matter?" "No," Eddie grunted. "Deploying magnetic grapple." He had to time this perfectly. If he missed, the pod would tumble out of range. If he hit it too hard, he would crush the occupant. He matched the spin, his hands dancing over the controls, with a grace that belied the rust bucket he was flying. This was the skill that had made him a legend before he was a cripple. "Thanks." The magnetic clamp fired. The cable pulled taut. The Second Chance shuddered violently as the weight of the pod anchored to them. "Gotcha," Eddie whispered. He reeled it in, fighting the wind shear that tried to snap the cable. He dragged the pod toward the shuttle's rear cargo airlock. The sensors screamed warnings about hull stress, but Eddie ignored them. He locked the pod against the hatch seals and pressurized the connection. "Control package is secured. Resuming course for Harbor 9. I am going to check on the survivor." "Copy that, Second Chance. Good work." Eddie engaged the autopilot. He unbuckled his harness, grabbed the stun baton he kept under the seat just in case, and limped toward the rear airlock. He sealed the door between the cockpit and the passenger hold, so the miners would not see what he was doing. He stood before the inner airlock door. The light above it turned green. Pressure equalized. Eddie hit the release. The door hissed open, and a wave of freezing mist rolled out. It smelled of ozone and something muskier, like wet fur and copper. Water coolant fluid likely spilled across the metal grating of the deck, soaking Eddie's boots. The life pod was a wreck. Sparks showered from its control panel. And there, in the center of the chaos, a figure was trying to stand. It was massive. Even hunched over, the figure nearly brushed the ceiling of the shuttle. It was covered in silver fur that was matted and drenched, sticking to the heavy armored plating of a uniform. Eddie froze. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. His hand dropped instinctively to the stun baton, his thumb hovering over the trigger. It was a Fenry, a wolf. The creature coughed a harsh barking sound that rattled in its chest. It shook itself, sending a spray of water flying across the room, before turning its gaze on Eddie. Its eyes were gold slit-pupilled and burning with a fierce intelligence. Its ears, pointed and tufted with black fur, were currently flattened against its skull in exhaustion. Its tail was tucked low, dripping water. "Identify!" Eddie barked, his voice shaking with a rage he thought he had buried. The Fenrir straightened up, towering over him. It was definitely a female, judging by the voice, looked at the stun baton with unimpressed eyes. "Admiral Virginia," she rasped. Her basic was accented guttural, but clear. "Third Fleet of the Fenrir Empire." Eddie felt the blood drain from his face. An admiral. He was staring at one of the architects of the war. He was staring at the enemy. "Give me one reason I should not cycle this airlock and flush you back into the storm," Eddie said, his voice low and dangerous. Virginia looked at him. She did not look afraid. She looked annoyed. She reached up and squeezed water out of the fur on her forearm. "Because," she said, "that would be a waste of a very impressive mid-air retrieval. And because I am currently unarmed, injured, and very wet." She took a step forward. Eddie raised the baton. "Sit down," he ordered. "In the jump seat. Now." Virginia rolled her eyes, a gesture that looked bizarrely human on a wolf-like face, and collapsed into the spare observer's seat, bolted to the wall. The metal creaked under her weight. She fumbled with the harness, her clawed fingers struggling with the human-sized buckles. "Your atmosphere controls are set too high," she grumbled, sniffing the air. "It smells of oxidation and sweat." "It smells like honest work," Eddie snapped. He kept his distance, leaning against the bulkhead. "And you smell like a wet dog that rolled in engine grease." Virginia chuffed a sound that might have been a laugh or a growl. "Better than smelling like a hairless ape wrapped in synthetic fibers. This seat is designed for a child." "It is designed for a human," Eddie corrected. "Which is what this ship is for. Why were you falling out of the sky, Admiral?" "My ship suffered a malfunction," she said evasively. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. "A sabotage. I ejected before the reactor went critical." "Sabotage," Eddie repeated. "And where is the rest of your fleet?" "Searching for me, I assume." She opened one eye. "You need to dock at a diplomatic pier. I require secure communications." "I am a commercial shuttle," Eddie said, crossing his arms. "I dock at the commercial bays, Bay 5. That is where my clearance is." "I am a High Admiral of the Empire," Virginia growled, her hackles rising slightly. "You will not parade me through a civilian terminal like a prize catch." "Watch me," Eddie said. "My contract says I drop passengers at Bay 5. You want the diplomatic pier, that is extra. And frankly, I do not think you have any credits on you." "I will have you compensated," she snapped. "I do not want your money. I want you off my ship." The tension in the small room was thick enough to choke on. Eddie stared at her, seeing the monster from his nightmares. Virginia stared back, seeing a stubborn, scruffy human with a metal leg and a chip on his shoulder the size of a moon. "Pilot," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "You have no idea what you have caught in your net." "A headache," Eddie said. "That is what I caught." Suddenly, the ship lurched. It was not turbulence. It was a pressure wave, a massive displacement of air and gravity that hit the second chance so hard, the hull plate screamed. "What was that?" Virginia demanded, sitting up her ears, swiveling forward. Eddie scrambled back to the cockpit, sliding into his seat. "Computer report. Slipstream breach detected," the ship's computer droned. "Proximity alert. Massive displacement directly overhead." Eddie looked up through the canopy. The storm clouds above Harbor 9 were not just parting. They were being shredded. The sky tore open. It was a violent, jagged wound, in reality, bleeding blue Cherenkov radiation. From the breach, 3 shapes emerged. They were enormous, predatory. Their hulls were matte gunmetal, swept forward like spearheads, bristling with weapon batteries that could turn a planet into glass. Fenrir, heavy cruisers. They screamed as they entered the atmosphere, their engines emitting that terrifying high-pitched zing sound Mia had mimicked. They did not slow down. They plummeted toward the station, braking violently at the last second, to hover menacingly over the docking spires of Harbor 9. Traveler's ghost, Eddie whispered. The comms panel lit up like a Christmas tree. Every channel was screaming. Panic from the station. Panic from the miners in the back. Then a signal overrode them all. It blasted through the speakers with enough gain to rattle Eddie's teeth. It was a voice, speaking Fenri, instantly translated, by the computer, into a mechanical flat basic. Attention, Harbor 9. Do not attempt to launch defense fighters. We are tracking the signature of the Admiral. Eddie looked back at the airlock door. Virginia was standing there looking through the small viewport, her face unreadable. The broadcast continued. Human pilot Eddie Ward. Eddie froze. His coffee cup, which had been sitting on the dashboard console, vibrated off the edge and hit the floor, spilling brown liquid over his boots. He didn't feel it. They knew his name. We have identified your vessel's second chance. Call sign Ghost 3. We require your immediate compliance. We need you. Ghost 3. The air left Eddie's lungs. That call sign had been buried. It had been redacted from the public archives. It belonged to a dead man, a man who had died alongside his squadron in the burning wreckage of the Vega Gate. Pilot Ward, the voice boomed again, repeating the phrase like a mantra. We need you. The station manager's face popped up on the priority screen, overriding the navigation charts. He was a sweaty man named Henderson, and he looked like he was about to have a stroke. Ward, what in the hell is going on? Henderson screamed. Why are there 3 capital ships parking on my roof and calling your name? I picked up a stray Henderson, Eddie said, his voice hollow. The life pod. It's their Admiral. You have an Admiral on board? Henderson wiped his forehead with a trembling hand. Okay. Listen to me, Eddie. They are demanding you bring the shuttle to the flagship. They want to talk. I am not going up there, Eddie said, panic rising in his throat. I am not boarding a Fenri warship. Not again. If you do not, they might glass the station, Henderson yelled. Look, Eddie, I know you are in a hole. You owe the station 3,000 credits in back rent and docking fees. You cooperate, you get this Admiral to them, and I wipe the slate. Clean. Zero balance. I will even put a permanent security detail on your apartment block for Mia. Top priority safety. Eddie looked at the photo of Mia taped to the console. She was smiling, missing a front tooth. Debt, forgiveness. Safety for Mia. Or a war that would kill everyone on the station. It was not a choice. It never was. Clear me a path, Eddie whispered. I am bringing her in. He maneuvered the second chance toward the designated docking bay. The 3 Fenri ships hovered silently now, their weapons tracked on his tiny shuttle. It felt like flying into the mouth of a beast. He brought the shuttle down on the landing pad of Bay 5. The clamps locked. The engines whined down. Through the viewport he saw the dock was swarming, not just with dock workers, but with armed station security and a detachment of Fenri soldiers who had just rappelled down from dropships. They stood in 2 lines, forming a corridor of armor and weapons. Eddie stood up. His leg ached violently. He grabbed his jacket, hiding the tremors in his hands. He opened the airlock. Virginia was waiting. She had squeezed most of the water out of her uniform, though she still looked like a drowned rat. But her posture was rigid, commanding. You fly well for a human, she said. It was almost a compliment. You smell less like a wet dog when you are dry, Eddie shot back. Almost. Do not push your luck, Ghost 3. They walked down the ramp together. The humid air of the station dock hit them. The silence was deafening. Hundreds of eyes were watching them. And then a small blur of motion broke the line of security. Daddy, Mia. She had slipped past the guards. She was running across the oil-stained deck, her light-up sneakers flashing. Mia, no! Eddie shouted, lunging forward. She did not stop. She slammed into Eddie's legs, hugging him tight. Then she pulled back and looked up. Way up! She stared directly at Admiral Virginia. The giant wolf woman looked down at the tiny human child. The soldiers raised their weapons. Eddie stepped in front of Mia, shielding her with his body, his hand going for the baton again. Mia peeked around Eddie's hip. Her eyes were wide, filled with that strange, knowing light. "Bah!" Mia whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Can I pet the big wolf?" The silence that followed was absolute. The terrifying Fenry soldiers shifted uneasily. Henderson, watching from the observation deck, covered his face. Virginia stared at the child. The golden eyes narrowed. She leaned down, bringing her face inches from Eddie and Mia. Eddie held his breath, ready to fight and die right there. Virginia's nose twitched. Then, a low, rumbling sound came from her throat. It was a chuckle, a rusty, unused sound. "She has courage, pilot," Virginia said, straightening up. "More than you." Eddie stood there, one arm wrapped protectively around his daughter, his other hand clenched in a fist. He felt the weight of the past pressing on his back, the phantom pain in his leg, the memories of fire. He felt the weight of the present, the massive warships hovering outside the blast shields. And he felt the future Mia looking at a monster and seeing something else. "We need to talk, Eddie Ward," Virginia said, her voice serious again. "The gate is waking up." Eddie looked at the ships. He looked at the wolf. He looked at his daughter. "I know," he said. And for the first time in 5 years, he stopped running. The transition from the shuttle Second Chance to the Fenry flagship Iron Fang felt less like a docking maneuver and more like being swallowed by a leviathan. The shuttle shuddered violently as the massive magnetic clamps of the dreadnought seized it, pulling the small, rusted vessel into the belly of the beast. Eddie Ward unbuckled his harness, his movement stiff. Beside him, Mia was practically vibrating, but not with fear. Her eyes were wide, scanning the ceiling of the shuttle, as if she could see through the hull plates to the alien machinery thrumming beyond. "It is so loud here, Daddy," she whispered, rubbing her ears. "The song. It is like 1,000 drums all beating at once." "Just stay close to me, Mia," Eddie said, checking the power cell on his prosthetic leg. "And do not touch anything unless I say so." When the airlock cycled open, the smell hit them first. It was distinct, a mix of ozone-sterilized metal and a heavy, musky scent that reminded Eddie of a wet forest floor. It was the scent of the pack. They stepped out onto a flight deck that was large enough to house a small city. Rows of Fenry interceptors, sleek predatory machines that looked like silver arrowheads, hung from magnetic racks on the ceiling. Below them, human maintenance crews and Fenry technicians moved in a chaotic but organized dance, their voices clashing in a dissonance of barking commands and shouted basic. Admiral Virginia was waiting for them. She had changed out of her waterlogged uniform into a fresh one, a severe charcoal tunic adorned with silver braiding that denoted her high rank. Her fur was groomed now, shimmering under the harsh hangar lights, and she stood with her hands clasped behind her back, flanked by 2 towering Fenry guards, who looked at Eddie as if he were a snack. "Pilot Ward," Virginia said, her voice carrying over the din of the deck. "Welcome to the Iron Fang. You will be escorted to the command spire. The delegation from your alliance is already waiting." "Delegation?" Eddie repeated the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. "You mean the people who want to court-martial me for existing?" "They want to save their own skins," Virginia corrected. "Just like us. Come. The girl comes too. I have assigned a detail to watch her." "She stays with me," Eddie said, stepping in front of Mia. "This is a warship, not a nursery," Virginia growled low in her throat, but there was no real heat in it. She glanced at Mia, who was busy staring at a passing drone. "She can stay in the observation antechamber of the war room. It is secure. Better than leaving her here where she might get stepped on by a cargo hauler." Eddie hesitated, then nodded. He took Mia's hand, and they followed the Admiral deeper into the ship. The interior of the Iron Fang was a testament to brutalist efficiency. The corridors were wide, designed for creatures that walked on digitigrade legs and stood 7 feet tall. The lighting was dim, shifted toward the amber spectrum that Fenry eyes preferred. Every time they passed a Fenry crew member, the alien would stop and press a fist to their chest in salute to Virginia, while casting suspicious yellow eyes at the limping human and the small child. They reached the command spire, a heavily armored section near the center of the ship. Virginia led them into a vast circular briefing room, dominated by a holographic tactical table. Standing on the other side of the table were 3 humans. One was a nervous-looking aide clutching a datapad. One was a severe man with the stars of a captain on his collar. And the third, Eddie, stopped dead in his tracks. The metal joint of his knee clicked audibly in the silence. She was standing with her back to the viewport, the starlight framing her silhouette. She turned as the door hissed shut. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, cut into a sharp professional bob that accentuated the line of her jaw. She wore the slate-gray uniform of naval intelligence, a stark contrast to the flight suit she used to live in. Jessie Rowe. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the ship's reactor and the frantic beating of Eddie's own heart. "Eddie," she said. Her voice was steady, trained, but her eyes, green, flecked with gold, betrayed a storm of emotion. Relief, fear, and a guilt so profound it was almost palpable. "Intelligence," Eddie said, his voice flat, ignoring her use of his first name. "I should have known. That explains the silence. Spooks do not call their ex-husbands." "It is not like that." Jessie stepped forward, reaching out a hand before letting it drop. "I wanted to. I tried to find you." "We are not here for a family reunion," Virginia interrupted, her tone sharp. She moved to the head of the table, her claws clicking on the glass surface. "We are here because the galaxy is about to bleed. Sit down." Eddie pulled a chair out for Mia in the glass-walled antechamber, adjacent to the room, giving her his datapad with a preloaded game. "Stay here, sweetie. I am right there behind the glass." "Okay, Daddy," Mia said, though her eyes were fixed on the tactical table, watching the lights dance. Eddie returned to the room and sat at the far end of the table, as far from Jessie as he could get. "The situation is critical," the human captain began, tapping the console. A hologram of the Vega sector sprang to life. 18 hours ago, long-range sensors detected a massive energy spike from the ruins of the Vega Gate. We thought the gate was inert, dead. We were wrong. The hologram zoomed in on the gate. It was a shattered ring floating in a debris field of broken ships, the graveyard of Eddie's squadron. But now, the cracks in the ring were glowing with a sickly, violet light. "It is bleeding vacuum energy," Virginia explained. "The gate is attempting to form a stable wormhole, but the aperture is damaged. It is not just opening a door, it is tearing the fabric of space-time. If it fully activates in this state, the backlash will ignite the slipstream network. Every ship in transit, every station connected to the grid incinerated. Harbor 9 included," Eddie realized. "And Earth," Jessie added softly. "And the Fenry homeworld." "So, turn it off," Eddie said, leaning back. "You have battleships. Bomb it into dust." "We cannot," the captain said. "The core is shielded by a displacement field. Kinetic weapons just phase through it. We need to shut it down from the inside. We need to interface with the control core." "And that," Virginia said, looking directly at Eddie, "is where you come in." She tapped the table. A new schematic appeared. It was a fighter craft, sleek black with inverted wings, and a cockpit that looked more like a coffin. "The X-90 Wraith," Eddie whispered. "I thought the project was scrapped." "It was," Jessie said, "after the massacre. But one prototype remains. The Wraith was designed to interface directly with the gate's navigational AI using a neural link. It bypasses the manual controls. But the AI is picky. It takes a neural imprint to lock in." "During the field tests 5 years ago," the captain said, looking at a file, 4 pilots attempted the link. 3 died of brain hemorrhages. 1 survived and established a stable handshake. Ghost 3, Eddie said. You, Virginia confirmed. Your neural signature is the only key the lock will accept. If anyone else gets in that cockpit, the gate will fry their brain and then overload. You have to fly the Wraith into the debris field dock with the core and input the shutdown sequence. Eddie stared at the wireframe of the fighter. He felt the phantom burning in his leg again. They wanted him to go back there, to the place where he died. I am a shuttle pilot, Eddie said quietly. I fly drunks and cargo. I have a prosthetic leg that jams when it rains. I am not a hero. We do not need a hero, a new voice boomed through the speakers. The main screen at the wall flickered, and the face of Admiral Cade Rowan appeared. He had aged well, Eddie noted with a surge of hatred. His hair was silver, his uniform immaculate, his jaw square and confident. He sat in an office that looked more like a throne room, the flag of the Human Alliance draped behind him. We need a tool, Rowan continued, his blue eyes cold as ice. And right now, Mr. Ward, you are the only wrench that fits the bolt. Admiral Rowan, Eddie said, not bothering to stand. I wondered when you would show up. You are looking healthy for a man who sent 2 squadrons to their deaths. Watch your tone, pilot, the captain at the table snapped. Rowan raised a hand, silencing his subordinate. Let him speak. He is angry. He has a right to be. But anger does not change the math, Eddie. Millions of lives against one pilot's trauma. The equation is simple. I want the logs, Eddie said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. Excuse me, Rowan frowned. The black box data from the Vega massacre, Eddie said, standing up. I want to know why my squadron was ordered to hold position when we were outnumbered 20-1. I want to know why the backup never came. You unseal the files right now or I do not fly. That data is classified top secret, Rowan said smoothly. Releasing it would compromise ongoing intelligence operations. The war is over, Eddie shouted, slamming his fist on the table. What operations? The peace is fragile, Eddie, Rowan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Do not test it. Remember what you owe humanity. Remember who is sitting in that glass room behind you. Eddie froze. He looked back at Mia. She was happily tapping on the datapad, oblivious to the threat. He turned back to the screen. Rowan was smiling. It was a small, tight smile. You do this, Rowan said, and your pension is restored. Full benefits. Your daughter gets into the best academies on Terra Prime. You walk away. You refuse, and I cannot guarantee that Child Protective Services will not take a very close look at the living conditions of a disabled veteran on a frontier station. The silence in the room was absolute. Virginia was watching Rowan with narrowed eyes, her ears flattened. Even the human captain looked uncomfortable. I will fly your ship, Eddie said, his voice like grinding stones. But when I come back, Rowan, I am coming for you. Just come back, son, Rowan said, and cut the feed. The meeting dispersed in a heavy atmosphere. The human delegation hurried out to prepare the briefing packets. Virginia lingered for a moment looking at Eddie, then turned and left without a word. Eddie went to the antechamber. Mia looked up beaming. Did you win the meeting, Daddy? Yeah, baby, Eddie said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack his face. I won. Come on, let's go see the ship. He led her out, but signaled for a guard to take her to the mess hall for food. He needed a moment. He needed to scream or break something. He found himself in the main hangar bay, walking toward the far end, where the prototype Wraith was being prepped. It sat there like a black spider, dark and menacing amidst the silver Fenry ships. You should not have challenged him like that. Eddie didn't turn. He knew the voice. Jessie Rowe walked up beside him. She was holding a cup of steaming calf, her hands shaking slightly. He is a monster, Jess, Eddie said, staring at the ship. And you work for him. I work for the Alliance, she said defensively. I work to keep people safe. Is that why you left? Eddie turned to face her. To keep us safe, you walked out on me in the recovery ward, Jess. I woke up without a leg and without a wife. And you took Mia." "I had to," Jessie's voice cracked. She looked around, ensuring no one was close enough to hear. "You do not understand, Eddie. After Vega, things were complicated. Rowan had eyes on everyone who survived, especially Mia." "Why Mia?" Eddie frowned. "She was a baby." "She was exposed," Jessie said, choosing her words carefully, "to the energy of the gate. During the evacuation, I needed to hide her. I needed to make sure she was not studied. Leaving you was the only way to make him think she was irrelevant. A broken family. Just another statistic." "So you sacrificed us," Eddie said bitterly, "to play a long game." "I sacrificed my happiness." Jessie snapped, tears welling in her eyes. "Do you think I wanted to leave? Do you think I did not cry every night for 2 years? I did it to keep her off the grid until she was old enough. I did it for her." "You did it," Eddie said, leaning in close, "because you trust the system more than you trust me. You thought I was too broken to protect her." Jessie opened her mouth to argue, but the words died on her lips. She looked away. "That is it, isn't it?" Eddie let out a harsh laugh. "You looked at the cripple in the bed and thought, he cannot handle this. So you took the burden. You are just like Rowan. You think you are the only one who can do the math." "I am sorry, Eddie," she whispered. "Save it," Eddie said, turning back to the ship. "I am doing this for Mia, not for you, and definitely not for the Alliance. Once this is done, you go back to your spooks, and we go back to our station." High above on the catwalk, unseen in the shadows of the ventilation ducts, Admiral Virginia watched the exchange. Her enhanced hearing picked up every word. She felt a strange tightness in her chest. It was not a sensation she was used to. Fenry did not have ex-husbands. They had mates, or they had nothing. The concept of this messy, lingering, painful human attachment was alien to her. And yet, watching the human female, this Jessie, standing close to Eddie, smelling of shared history and unresolved grief, Virginia felt a low growl building in her throat. She suppressed it, instantly annoyed with herself. He is a pilot, she told herself. A tool, nothing more. But as she watched Eddie limp away, shoulders hunched under the weight of the world, she knew that was a lie. He was Pac. Broken Pac perhaps, but Pac nonetheless. And someone was threatening him. Virginia turned and stalked toward the simulation deck. She needed to make sure the tool was sharp. The simulation room was a spherical chamber, lined with holographic projectors. Eddie sat in the mock pit of the Wraith, the neural headset pressing against his temples, like a vice. "Simulation sequence initiated," the computer voice intoned. "Scenario Vega approach. Difficulty maximum." The world dissolved into static, then reformed. He was back. The stars of the Vega system burned cold and bright. The debris field was thick, spinning chunks of titanium and glass. And ahead, the gate loomed a massive iris of darkness. "Ghost Leader to Ghost Squadron," Eddie said, his voice echoing in the empty room. "Form up. Attack vectors locked." But there was no Ghost Squadron, just the ghosts in his head. "Warning! Hostile lock!" the computer blared. Red lights flashed. Fenry fighters swarmed out of the shadow of the gate. The sound of the alarm was the same sound he heard in his nightmares. Explosions. The scream of tearing metal. The voice of Johnny, his wingman, begging for help before his radio cut to static. The heat tearing through the cockpit floor, melting his boot, melting his flesh. "No!" Eddie gasped, his hands spasming on the controls. "Pull up! Pull up!" The simulation did not care. The virtual fire engulfed him. He could smell it. Burning meat. "Abort!" Eddie screamed. He ripped the headset off, scrambling out of the cockpit. He fell onto the metal grating of the simulation floor, gasping for air, sweat soaking his shirt. He clutched his metal leg, rocking back and forth. "Breathe, human." The voice was stern, lacking any pity. Eddie looked up. Virginia stood in the doorway, Her arms crossed. "Get out!" Eddie wheezed. "I said abort." "You died," Virginia said, walking into the room. She did not offer him a hand. She stood over him like a statue. "In the simulation, you froze, and then you died." "I know," Eddie shouted, wiping sweat from his eyes. "I cannot do it. The machine, it feels too real. It brings it all back." "Good," Virginia said. Eddie stared at her. "Good. Fear is data," Virginia said, crouching down so she was eye level with him. Her golden eyes were intense, alien, but not unkind. "You humans try to push it away. You try to forget. Fenry do not forget. We carry our dead with us." She tapped her chest over her heart. "My brother died at Vega. His ship was vaporized by your squadron." Eddie flinched. "I did not know." "It was war," Virginia said simply. "He died well. But I do not pretend he is not gone. When I fly with his memory. I let the grief sharpen my claws. You are trying to fly around your pain, Eddie. You cannot. You have to fly through it." "It is too heavy," Eddie whispered. "I failed them. I led them right into the trap." "Then do not fail the little one," Virginia said softly. "The past is a ghost. It cannot hurt you anymore. But the future has teeth. If you do not get back in that chair, the future will eat your daughter." She stood up and extended a hand. It was a clawed, dangerous hand covered in silver fur. "Get up, Ghost 3. The pack needs you." Eddie looked at the hand. Then he looked at his own shaking fingers. He took a deep breath, letting the smell of the ozone and the wolf fill his lungs. He reached out and grasped her hand. Her grip was iron strong, pulling him to his feet effortlessly. "One more time," Eddie said, steadying himself. "Run the program again." Virginia nodded a hint of approval in the tilt of her ears. Again. While Eddie fought his demons in the simulator, Mia had grown bored with the datapad. The guard assigned to her, a young human corporal, was busy flirting with a comms officer down the hall. Mia slipped out of the mess hall. She did not know where she was going, but she knew where the song was coming from. It was pulling her, a gentle rhythmic thrumming that vibrated in her teeth. She walked through the twisting corridors of the Iron Fang Small and unnoticed. She passed engineers who were too busy to look down. She ducked under conduits and climbed through open maintenance hatches. Finally, she reached the main hangar deck. The Wraith sat there. It was ugly to most eyes, angular black threatening. But to Mia it looked lonely. She walked up to the landing gear. The ship hummed. It was a low, discordant sound like a violin played by a nervous hand. "You are sad," Mia whispered. She reached up. She was too short to reach the cockpit, but a data port hung low near the wheel strut. It was an exposed bundle of fiber optics glowing faintly red. Mia reached out with her small finger. "Hey, kid, get away from there!" A technician shouted from across the bay, dropping his wrench. Mia did not hear him. She touched the red light. Zzzzt! A spark jumped. Mia gasped, her eyes rolling back for a second. The entire ship shuddered. The harsh, jagged red lights that ran along the Wraith's fuselage suddenly pulsed. They smoothed out. The color shifted, bleeding from angry crimson to a soft, pulsating aquatic blue. The discord in the hum vanished. The ship began to sing, a pure harmonic tone that resonated through the entire hangar bay. The technician froze. He checked his tablet. What the diagnostic errors just cleared. All of them. Synchronization is at 100%. From the shadows of a supply alcove, a figure in flowing robes stepped out. It was Vera, the Fenry High Priestess. She wore the bone charms of her station, and her eyes were milky white with age. She stared at the human child standing by the war machine, her hand resting on the deadly metal, as if it were a sleeping pet. "The prophecy," Vara murmured, her voice trembling. "The Iron Singer, the child who makes the metal stop crying." Vara, a Fenry security officer, marched over, grabbing the priestess by the arm. "Come away. The Admiral does not want you bothering the humans with your old superstitions." "It is not superstition." Vara hissed, pointing a gnarled claw at Mia. Look, the machine spirit is at peace. She is the bridge. She is a child who almost electrocuted herself, the officer grunted, dragging Vara away. Move along. Mia pulled her hand back. She felt tired but happy. She patted the landing strut. Sleep well, she whispered. My daddy is going to fly you soon. 3 hours later, the fleet was ready. The Iron Fang, flanked by 2 Fenry cruisers, and a hastily assembled escort of human frigates, aligned their vectors. On the bridge, Virginia sat in the command chair, her posture rigid. Eddie stood beside her, looking at the main view screen. Jessie was at the comm station, her face pale. Fleet-wide channel open, Jessie announced. This is Admiral Virginia, the Wolf spoke into the comms. All ships, initiate slipstream drive. Target coordinates Vega sector. We go to close the door. Punch it, Eddie murmured. The stars outside the viewport stretched into long lines of light. The deck plates vibrated, and then with a sound like tearing silk, the fleet vanished from normal space. When they emerged, it was into a nightmare. The Vega gate filled the screen. It was colossal, a broken eye, staring into the void. Around it, thousands of tons of wreckage, the remnants of the battle 5 years ago, drifted in a slow, mournful dance. But the center of the gate was no longer black. It was a swirling vortex of violent purple energy, crackling with lightning that reached out to lick the drifting corpses of the ships. Eddie stared at the graveyard. He saw the hull of a ship with the number 03 painted on it, his old ship's sister craft. It was torn in half. He felt the fear rising cold and sharp. But then, he felt the weight of Virginia's hand on his shoulder. He thought of Mia waiting in the secure room, humming her song. He clenched his jaw. Control, Eddie said, his voice finding its steel. This is Ghost 3. I am heading to the hangar. Prep the Wraith. He looked at the broken gate, his eyes narrowing. You took everything from me once, he whispered to the void. This time I decide how the story ends. The transition from the faster-than-light slipstream back to normal space usually felt like a sudden drop in a high-speed elevator. But emerging into the Vega sector felt more like stepping into a tomb. The stars here were distant and cold, their light struggling to pierce the thick, suffocating cloud of dust and gas that lingered like a shroud. And floating in that silence was the Vega Gate. It was a monstrosity of ancient engineering, a ring of black, non-reflective material, 3 miles in diameter. But it was no longer the sleek, dormant circle Eddie remembered from the briefing hollows. It was cracked. Massive fissures ran along its surface, glowing with a sickly, unstable violet light that pulsed like an infected vein. And around it lay the bones of the dead. The debris field stretched for thousands of miles. Twisted hulls of human destroyers drifted alongside the shattered spines of Fenry cruisers. Frozen bodies preserved perfectly in the vacuum floated amidst jagged shards of glass and titanium. It was a chaotic mosaic of violence frozen in time. On the observation deck of the Iron Fang, the silence was absolute. Eddie Ward stood by the reinforced viewport, his hand resting unconsciously on his prosthetic leg. He looked out at the graveyard and felt a physical blow to his chest. He recognized the markings on a drifting wing fragment. It belonged to the Wildfire Johnny's ship. Johnny, who had owed him 50 credits and a bottle of whiskey. Beside him, Admiral Virginia stood with her head bowed. Her ears were flattened against her skull, and her tail was tucked low. She was not looking at the ships as machines. She was looking at them as tombs. Her lips moved silently, reciting the Fenry litany for the fallen warriors' enemies and kin alike. Jessie Rowe stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped tight around herself as if she were cold. She was not looking at the ships. She was looking at the reflection of Eddie's face in the glass, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. And then there was Mia. The little girl pressed her hands against the cold glass. Her eyes were not sad. They were wide, darting back and forth, tracking something no one else could see. "It is broken," Mia whispered. Her voice seemed loud in the quiet room. Yes, baby, Eddie said, his voice rough. It is all broken. A lot of good people died here. No, Daddy, Mia said, shaking her head. She pointed at the colossal pulsating gate. Not the ships, the song. The gate is trying to sing, but the song has a broken leg. It keeps tripping. It sounds like it is scared. Virginia turned her head slowly, her golden eyes fixing on the child. Scared a machine cannot feel fear, little one. It is not a machine, Mia insisted, tracing the violet pulses on the glass. It is a wound. A chill ran down Eddie's spine. He pulled Mia away from the window. That is enough, looking sweetie. Go sit with the data pad. Alert, the ship's intercom announced, breaking the mood. Debris density increasing. Scout wing prepare for deployment. Navigation hazard level extreme. Eddie straightened up. The grief locked away instantly, replaced by the pilot. That is my cue, he said. I am leading the Pathfinder unit. If we are going to get the Wraith in there, I need to map a tunnel through this junk heap. Be careful, Eddie, Jessie said, stepping forward. Eddie looked at her, his eyes hard. Save it for the report intelligence. He turned and limped toward the hangar bay, leaving her standing in the cold light of the dead stars. The scout mission was a nightmare of physics and geometry. Eddie sat in the cockpit of a Fenry light interceptor. He had refused to fly the Wraith until the final run, leading a wing of 3 other Fenry pilots. The controls were slightly too large for his hands, and the seat was designed for a tail he did not have, but the engines were magnificent. Ghost 3 to pack leader, a Fenry pilot named Rolf, barked over the comms. Sensors are useless in here. Too much metallic interference. We are flying blind. You are not blind, Rolf. You have eyes, Eddie snapped, banking his ship hard to avoid a floating reactor core. Stop looking at your screens and look out the canopy. Use the Mark I eyeball. Primitives, Rolf grumbled, but he followed Eddie's lead. The debris field was dense. It was a 3-dimensional maze of razor-sharp metal, spinning in the void. Eddie flew with an intuitive grace, anticipating the drift of the wreckage. He felt the rhythm of the gravity wells created by the larger capital ship husks. Hold up, Eddie ordered. Large mass rotating at 2 o'clock. It is a human carrier class, the Indomitable. The massive gutted corpse of the carrier drifted past, leaking frozen atmosphere. Respect, Rolf muttered. She was a hard kill. Suddenly, a piece of the carrier's hull, a jagged plate of armor, the size of a building sheared off, struck by a micrometeoroid. It began to spin wildly, tumbling directly toward Rolf's flank. Rolf, brake left, Eddie shouted. I cannot, Rolf yelled back. Thrusters are lagging, the magnetic field is jamming my response. The Fenry ship was sluggish, relying on automated collision avoidance systems that were overwhelmed by the chaos. The massive plate was seconds away from crushing Rolf's fragile interceptor. Eddie did not think. He did not calculate. He just reacted. He slammed his throttle to 100%. His interceptor surged forward, screaming past Rolf's nose. Eddie flipped his ship on its vertical axis, exposing the reinforced belly of his craft, the thickest armor on the interceptor. Brace! Eddie gritted his teeth. He slammed his ship into the spinning debris. Crunch. The impact was deafening even in the vacuum transmitted through the hull. The force threw Eddie against his harness, knocking the wind out of him. But the angle was perfect. He hit the debris plate at a deflection angle, using his ship's momentum to shove the massive piece of metal just a few degrees off course. The debris missed Rolf's canopy by inches, spinning harmlessly away into the dark. Ghost 3, Rolf, shouted, his voice high with shock. Report. Are you intact? Eddie's cockpit was flashing red with warnings. Shields are down to 10%. Structural integrity at 80. I assume that counts as intact in your fleet. There was a pause on the channel. Then a low rumbling sound, the Fenry equivalent of applause. You used your ship as a hammer, Rolf said, sounding both horrified and impressed. That was insanely dangerous. That is how humans do it, Eddie wheezed, checking his ribs. We do not wait for the computer to save us. We improvise. Let's finish the sweep and get home. Drinks are on you, Wolf. Back on the Iron Fang, the mood was tense. The proximity to the gate was affecting everyone. Tempers were short. The Fenry crew snarled at the human technicians. The humans looked at the Fenry with suspicion. Eddie brought his battered interceptor in for a landing. As the canopy hissed open, he saw Virginia waiting on the deck. She looked at the dented side of his ship, then at him. "You scratched my paint," she said, though her tail gave a slight involuntary twitch of approval. "Rolf owes me a beer," Eddie said, climbing down. "We mapped a route. It is tight, but the Wraith can fit. Speaking of which, I need to run a diagnostic on the Wraith's neural locks. Being out there, it felt weird. Like the gate was watching me." "Do it," Virginia nodded. "But make it quick. The energy spikes are getting more frequent." Eddie limped over to the Wraith. He plugged the neural headset into the port on his temple, standing on the boarding ladder. "Initiating handshake," he muttered. The world dissolved into white. Usually, the connection was a stream of numbers and vectors. But this time, it was different. The proximity to the active gate created a resonance. Flash. An image seared into his brain. It was not a simulation. It was a memory log pulled from the deep storage of the Wraith's black box data that had been uploaded during the brief window the ship was active 5 years ago. He saw the battle. He saw his squadron dying. But then, the image shifted. He saw a human cruiser, the Aegis, holding position on the flank. It was not firing at the Fenry. It was firing at a human transport ship. Flash. The image blurred, corrupted by time and damage. But the telemetry was clear. The explosion that had crippled the defensive line, the explosion everyone blamed on a Fenry stealth torpedo, had come from the Aegis. "What?" Eddie gasped, ripping the headset off. He staggered back, nearly falling off the ladder. His heart was racing. Friendly fire. No, that was too precise. That was an execution. He downloaded the fragment to a secure data chip. He needed eyes on this. Eyes that understood the encrypted naval codes. He needed Jessie. He found her in the temporary intelligence annex the humans had set up near the bridge. She was alone, surrounded by holographic displays of the energy readings. "Jess," Eddie said, closing the door and locking it. "Eddie!" She looked up, startled. "You look like you have seen a ghost." "I have," he said, slamming the chip onto the table. "I just pulled this from the Wraith's deep memory. It is a log from the massacre. The Aegis it fired on our own lines, Jess. It took out the support transport to create a hole in the formation. That is why we got swarmed." Jessie stared at the chip, as if it were a venomous snake. Her face went pale. "Eddie, you should not have seen this." "What do you mean?" Eddie stepped closer, his voice rising. You knew we were shot in the back by our own fleet." "It is not that simple." Jessie stood up, her hands trembling. The Aegis was under direct command of Special Operations, Admiral Rowan's unit. "Rowan," Eddie spat the name. "So he sacrificed a transport full of supplies to what bait the trap? To force the engagement," Jessie whispered, tears welling up again. The Fenry were hesitating. Rowan wanted a total war. He needed a tragedy big enough to unite the Alliance Council. He created a martyr event. "He murdered my friends," Eddie roared. "And you buried it. You became one of his fixers." "I buried it to keep us alive," Jessie shouted back. "Do you think I wanted this? Look at this data, Eddie. If this gets out, Rowan goes down. But he knows that. He has kill switches everywhere. If I decrypt this fully, if I broadcast it, he will burn everything down to cover his tracks." "So we do nothing?" Eddie asked, incredulous. "I will handle it," Jessie said, her voice shaking. She reached for the chip. "I will process this through a secure channel. I can use it as leverage. Please, Eddie. Trust me." Eddie looked at her. He wanted to trust her. He remembered the woman who used to fly on his wing, the woman he had married. But looking at her now in that gray uniform, all he saw was a stranger. "You have 1 hour," Eddie said coldly. "If you do not release that file, I will fly the Wraith into the comms relay and broadcast it myself." He turned and stormed out. Jessie waited until he was gone. Then, with shaking fingers, she opened a channel. Not to the Fleet Command, but a direct encrypted line to Terra Prime. Admiral Rowan's face appeared. "Director Rowe," Rowan said pleasantly. "Do you have an update?" "He knows," Jessie said, her voice barely a whisper. "He found the log from the Aegis, the friendly fire incident." Rowan's expression did not change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "That is unfortunate. I assumed the data wipe on the Wraith was more thorough." "He wants to broadcast it," Jessie said. "Admiral, we have to stop this. If the truth comes out now, the Coalition will fracture. The Fenri will see it as proof of our duplicity. The peace will fail." "I agree," Rowan said. "Which is why you are going to contain it." "How?" Rowan leaned forward. "If Eddie Ward attempts to broadcast that data, or if he deviates from the mission profile to approach the core before I give the signal, you know what to do, Jessie. You have the overrides for his life support." "No," Jessie gasped. "I will not kill him." "Then think of the alternative," Rowan said softly. "My team is currently positioned 2 blocks away from the safe house in Sector 7, the one with the blue shutters. Where you think Mia would be safe if things went wrong here?" Jessie stopped breathing. "She is on the ship," Jessie said quickly. "She is here." "Is she?" Rowan smiled cruelly. "Are you sure I do not have assets on the Iron Fang? Accidents happen in space, Jessie. Airlocks malfunction. Food gets poisoned." "Do not touch her," Jessie hissed. "Then control your ex-husband," Rowan snapped. "If Eddie gets too close to the core before I am ready to seize it, you end him. Or the girl pays the price." The channel cut. Jessie stood there hyperventilating. She gripped the edge of the console until her knuckles turned white. She did not know that the door to the annex was thin. She did not know that Eddie had come back realizing he had forgotten his datapad. He had not heard everything, but he had heard enough. "If Eddie gets too close, you know what to do." Eddie stood in the hallway, his blood turning to ice. He did not hear the threat against Mia. He only heard the order to kill him. And he saw Jessie standing there accepting the call. He turned and walked away. The sadness was gone. There was only a cold, hard rage. He cornered her 10 minutes later in the corridor, leading to the mess hall. "Eddie!" Jessie started looking guilty. "Save it," Eddie said, backing her against the bulkhead. "I heard you, on the comms. You are still taking orders from him." "It is not what you think," Jessie pleaded, reaching for his arm. "He threatened Mia. I am trying to navigate this." "By plotting to kill me." Eddie laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Is that the plan? I fly the mission, I unlock the gate, and then you pop my cockpit seals so Rowan can swoop in and take the weapon. Was that always the plan? Is that why you brought me here?" "No, I am protecting you." "You are protecting your career," Eddie shouted. "You chose the uniform over me 5 years ago, and you are doing it again. You are a spook first, a mother second." The slap echoed through the corridor. Jessie stared at him, her hand stinging, her eyes wide with shock. Eddie stared back, his face red. "You do not know," Jessie whispered, her voice breaking. "You do not know what I owe that little girl. You do not know what I have done to keep her alive." "Then tell me," Eddie yelled. "I cannot my problem pilot." A shadow fell over them. Admiral Virginia loomed in the hallway, her massive frame blocking the light. Her ears were pitched forward aggressively, and a low growl vibrated in her chest. She looked at Eddie, then at Jessie. She saw the tears on Jessie's face and the rage on Eddie's. For a moment, Virginia felt a spike of emotion that confused her. It was a sharp, hot feeling in her gut. She wanted to step between them. She wanted to grab Eddie by the scruff of his neck and drag him away from this human woman who smelled of deception. She was jealous. The realization hit Virginia like a plasma bolt. She, a high admiral of the Fenri, was jealous of a human drama. She snarled, pushing the feeling down. "This is a warship," Virginia barked. "Not a domestic dispute arena. Pilot Ward, report to the simulation deck. Now." "I am busy," Eddie said, not looking at her. "That was an order," Virginia roared, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the corridor. "Or do you want me to throw you in the brig for insubordination?" Eddie looked at Jesse one last time. "We are not done," he said. He turned and limped past Virginia, brushing against her fur. Virginia watched him go, then turned her golden gaze on Jesse. "If you distract him again," Virginia said, her voice dangerously calm, "I will consider it sabotage. And on this ship, sabotage is a capital offense." Jessie wiped her eyes, regaining her composure. "I am doing my job, Admiral. You should do yours." She walked away, head held high, leaving Virginia alone in the hallway, swishing her tail in irritation. The training session was brutal. Virginia did not run the simulator. She stepped onto the sparring mats herself. "Hand-to-hand combat is part of pilot conditioning," she declared, throwing a padded training staff at Eddie. "Defend yourself." "I have a metal leg," Eddie grunted, catching the staff. "I am not exactly a ninja." "Your enemies will not care," Virginia said and lunged. She was fast, terrifyingly fast for something so large. Eddie barely managed to block her strike, the impact jarring his bones. He rolled backward using his low center of gravity to sweep at her legs. She jumped over the strike effortlessly. "Focus!" Virginia shouted, striking him again, knocking him to the mat. "You are distracted. You are thinking about the female." "She is my ex-wife," Eddie yelled, scrambling up. "It is complicated. It is weakness," Virginia circled him. "Pack bonds make you strong. Whatever that is," she gestured vaguely in the direction Jesse had gone, "is poison. It clouds your judgment." "You do not know anything about humans," Eddie panted, raising his staff. "I know you are soft," Virginia growled. "You let your emotions bleed. You need to be like the steel." She charged again. This time, Eddie did not block. He dropped the staff, slid between her legs, risking a crushed skull, and grabbed her tail. He yanked it hard. Virginia yelped a high-pitched sound and spun around off balance. Eddie used the momentum to shove her shoulder, sending the Admiral crashing onto the mat. Silence filled the room. The Fenri guards by the door looked ready to execute Eddie. Virginia lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. Then she started to laugh. It was a deep, chuffing sound. "That," she said, sitting up and rubbing her tail, "was a dirty move." "That is how humans do it," Eddie said, offering her a hand. "We cheat." Virginia looked at his hand. For the second time, she took it. But this time, she did not let go immediately. "You are not soft, Eddie Ward," she said quietly. "You are just dented." Before the moment could linger, the ship's alarm screamed. "Alert! Security breach. Engineering deck, C. Explosive detected." Virginia's eyes went wide. "That is the auxiliary reactor." "Move," Eddie shouted. They ran. They did not wait for the guards. Eddie's prosthetic leg whirred as he pushed it to the limit, keeping pace with the Admiral's long strides. They burst into the engineering corridor. Smoke was already filling the air. 3 figures in maintenance jumpsuits were huddled by an access panel, rigging a device. They were human. "Stop!" Virginia roared. The saboteurs turned. They were not panicked. They were professionals. One of them raised a heavy blaster rifle. "For Rowan!" he shouted, and opened fire. Virginia didn't hesitate. She leaped. It was a terrifying display of primal power. She covered the 20 feet in a single bound, slamming into the gunman, her claws shredding his armor. The other 2 drew sidearms. Eddie slid across the floor, drawing his stun baton. He still didn't have a lethal weapon. He kicked the knee of the second saboteur, hearing a satisfying crunch, and jammed the baton into the man's neck. The man convulsed and dropped. The third saboteur aimed at Virginia's exposed back. "Wolf 6 o'clock!" Eddie screamed. He grabbed a loose pipe from the floor and threw it. It struck the gunman's arm just as he fired. The shot went wide, singeing the fur on Virginia's ear. "Watch the ear, human!" Virginia roared, spinning around and backhanding the gunman into the bulkhead. He crumpled like a rag doll. "Watch the biting!" Eddie yelled back, scrambling to his feet. "You almost took my hand off!" The fight was over in seconds. 3 unconscious humans lay on the deck. The bomb on the panel was beeping. "Can you disarm it?" Virginia asked, sniffing the device. "It is a standard Alliance demolition charge," Eddie said, pulling out a multi-tool. "Blue wire for delay, red for boom. Give me some light." Virginia leaned in her body, shielding him from any potential blast. They worked in tandem, Eddie's fingers moving with surgical precision, Virginia holding the panel steady. "Got it," Eddie exhaled, severing the wire. The timer stopped at 003. He slumped back against the wall. Virginia sat beside him. They were both breathing hard, covered in soot. "Rowan's men," Eddie said, kicking the unconscious leader. "They were trying to blow your engine." "To make it look like we lost containment," Virginia deduced. "Or to disable us so the humans could take the lead." "If this gets out," Eddie said, "the fleet will tear itself apart." "It is already starting," Virginia said, her ears swiveling toward the comms panel on the wall. Voices were shouting over the ship-wide channel. Human captains accusing Fenry of sabotage. Fenry captains threatening to open fire on human ships. The Alliance was fracturing in real time. "We need to get to the bridge," Virginia said, standing up. But before they could move, the ship lurched violently. It was not an explosion. It was gravity. The floor tilted. Eddie slid down the corridor, grabbing a handrail. "What is happening?" he yelled. "The gate," Virginia shouted, digging her claws into the deck. "It is activating." Through the viewport at the end of the hall, the universe had gone mad. The Vega Gate was no longer a ring. It was a funnel. The violet light had expanded, swallowing the stars. A beam of pure negative energy shot out, latching onto the Iron Fang. "Does it have a tractor beam?" Eddie screamed. "It is a gravity well," Virginia corrected. "It is pulling us in." On the bridge, the crew was screaming. The engines were at maximum reverse, but they were sliding backward. "Admiral," the comms officer shouted. "The human command ship Aegis is also caught, and the shuttles. We are all being dragged in." "Mia," Eddie pushed himself off the wall. "Where is Mia?" "She is in the secure room." Virginia grabbed him. "We cannot get there. The G-force is too high." The ship groaned as the hull began to warp. They were crossing the event horizon of the gate. Outside, the debris field was being sucked in too. Massive chunks of wreckage smashed against the shields. "Hold on!" Virginia roared, wrapping her massive arms around Eddie, shielding him with her body as the world turned white. The Iron Fang, the Aegis, and the Wraith, still docked in the hangar, were pulled into the violet abyss. The screaming of the metal stopped. The shouting stopped. The light faded from blinding white to a suffocating absolute black. Then silence. Eddie opened his eyes. He was floating. Not in zero gravity, but in something else. The air was thick, like liquid, but breathable. The screens on the wall were dead. The emergency lights were out. Through the viewport there were no stars, no nebula, just an endless, shifting gray mist. The Iron Fang drifted in a void where up and down had no meaning. "Where are we?" Eddie whispered, his voice sounding flat, devoid of echo. Virginia uncurled herself, shaking her head. She looked out the window, her eyes wide with a primal terror. "The null chamber," she whispered. "The stomach of the beast. We are inside the gate." And in the distance, hanging in the gray void, was a structure. It looked like a needle miles long, pointing directly at them. It was a weapon. And it was waking up. The null chamber was a place where physics went to die. Inside the belly of the Vega Gate, there were no stars. There was only a suffocating milky grayness that pressed against the reinforced glass of the Iron Fang's bridge. The massive Fenri flagship, along with the human cruiser, Aegis and the prototype Wraith fighter, drifted in this fluidic void, their engines dead, their sensors blindingly white. But they were not alone. Floating at the geometric center of the chamber was a spire of obsidian metal. It was miles long, pulsating with the same violet agony as the gate outside. It was not just a control mechanism. It was a cannon. And as the crew of the Iron Fang watched in horror, the spire began to rotate. It was locking onto a set of coordinates that every Fenri knew by heart. The Fenri homeworld. "Energy transfer detected," the ops officer whispered, his voice trembling. "The spire is draining us. It is sucking the reactor output from every ship in the graveyard to charge a main firing sequence." "Time to impact," Admiral Virginia asked. She stood by the viewport, her silver fur bristling, her ears flattened against the unnatural silence. "At this rate of charge, 40 minutes, the officer replied. Eddie Ward stood next to her. He was gripping the railing so hard, his knuckles were white. He looked at the spire, then back at the Wraith fighter, which had been tractored in with them, and was now drifting near the Iron Fang's port docking claw. "It is a slaughterhouse," Eddie muttered. "He is not just closing the gate. He is firing a shotgun blast through a keyhole." Suddenly, the gray void outside the ship flickered. The static on the main view screen coalesced into a sharp, high-definition image. It was not a transmission from the fleet outside. It was a direct line from the heart of the human alliance. Admiral Cade Rowan sat in his office on Terra Prime. He looked calm, almost bored as he adjusted the cuffs of his uniform. "Greetings, Iron Fang," Rowan said. His voice was crystal clear, cutting through the static of the null chamber. "I see you have discovered the true nature of the Vega project." "Rowan!" Eddie shouted, stepping toward the screen. "You son of a bitch, you trapped us in here." "I contained a variable," Rowan corrected smoothly. "And please, Eddie, do not act so surprised. You were always a part of this, from the very beginning." Rowan leaned forward, his blue eyes icy. "Did you really think the Battle of Vega 5 years ago was a tactical error? Did you think I simply miscalculated the Fenri strength?" The bridge went silent. "It was a field test," Rowan continued, his voice devoid of humanity. "I needed to know if the gate's weapon systems could be triggered by kinetic trauma. I needed to know how the Fenri shields reacted to point-blank antimatter detonation. So I sent your squadron in. I disabled your early warning systems. I ordered the Aegis to fire on our own transport to ensure the chaos was absolute." Eddie felt the blood drain from his face. The rage that had been burning in him for 5 years turned into something colder, something darker. "We were bait," Eddie whispered. "My friends, my life, just bait." "You were data points," Rowan said. "And the data was magnificent. It allowed me to refine this." He gestured to the spire on the screen. "The Star Eater. A weapon capable of firing a slipstream-enhanced beam that can bypass planetary shields entirely. It is the end of the war, Eddie. The end of the Fenri threat. Forever." "It is genocide," Virginia growled, her voice vibrating through the deck plates. "It is survival," Rowan countered. "The weapon is fully charged, but the core is unstable. I could bypass the safeties and force a firing sequence, but that risks fracturing the focusing lens and destroying the device. I need a clean shot, Eddie. I need the weapon to accept the command, not fight it. That requires your neural signature." "I will never fire it," Eddie spat. "I thought you might say that," Rowan sighed. "Which is why I prepared an incentive." Rowan tapped a key on his desk. The screen split. On the right side, a shaky, grainy video feed appeared. It showed the interior of a safe house, a suburban home with blue shutters somewhere on Earth. The timestamp was live. Armed soldiers in black tactical gear were storming the house. Flashbangs detonated. Furniture was overturned. And in the corner of the room, crouching behind an overturned sofa, was a woman holding a small child. The woman was firing a pistol desperately at the attackers, blood streaming down her forehead. It was Jessie, and she was shielding Mia. Eddie's heart stopped. He spun around to look at the real Jessie, who was standing right there on the bridge of the Iron Fang. "What?" Eddie stammered. "How?" On the screen, the Jessie in the safe house screamed into the security camera, her voice distorted by panic and gunfire. "Eddie, if you are seeing this, do not do it. If you fire that weapon, they kill Mia. If you do not fire it, he burns the Fenry world. Do not let him win. Do not." The feed cut to static as a soldier butt stroked the camera. Rowan smiled. "A live feed from Sector 7. My team has them pinned. So the choice is yours, Ghost 3. You get in that Wraith, you interface with the Spire, and you pull the trigger. You wipe out the Fenry and I call off my dogs. Your daughter lives. Or you hesitate, and I order my team to clear the room." Eddie looked at the screen, then at the Jessie standing beside him. He was paralyzed by confusion and terror. "It is a trick," the real Jessie said. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were hard. She stepped into the light of the holotable. "Admiral Rowan," Jessie said, her voice projecting clearly to the screen. "Your intelligence is outdated." Rowan's eyes widened slightly on the screen. He looked at the Jessie on the bridge, then at the frozen frame of the Jessie on the feed. "I am a frantic mother, Admiral," Jessie said, her voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "But I am an intelligence director first. Did you really think I would leave my daughter in a house listed in my personnel file?" She turned to Eddie. "The woman on that screen isn't real, Admiral. It's a Category 5 deep sim, a digital construct. I hacked your surveillance feed 10 minutes ago and inserted a loop. The blood, the fighting, the screaming, it's all pre-rendered CGI. I didn't hide Mia on Earth. I hid her right under your nose." She looked back at Rowan. "Mia is not on Earth. She is here, on this ship. You have no leverage, you son of a bitch." Rowan stared at her. For a moment the mask slipped. He looked furious. "Clever," Rowan hissed. "Very clever, Director Rowe. But you have made a fatal miscalculation." He leaned back. "You are trapped in the null chamber. The weapon is drawing power from the Iron Fang's life support. In 2 hours, you will all suffocate. And when the weapon reaches critical mass without a controlled release, it won't just fire. It will detonate. It will erase the gate, the fleet, and your precious daughter." "So fire it," Rowan commanded. "Be a patriot, or be a corpse. I win either way." The connection severed. The screen went black. The silence on the bridge was heavier than before. "He is lying about the detonation," Virginia said, her voice tight. "But not about the life support. The air scrubbers are already failing." Eddie slumped against the console. He looked at Jessie. "Did you build a robot to die in your place?" "I built a shield," Jessie said. Her hands were trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. "I had to make him believe he had control. It was the only way to keep looking for a way out." "We are not firing that gun," Eddie said, straightening up. "I will not kill billions of people, not even for Mia." "Then we die," a Fenry officer said from the back. "No," Virginia stepped forward. She loomed over Eddie, her shadow stretching across the deck. "There is another way, the Fenry way." She pointed a claw at the drifting Wraith. "The weapon needs a neural link to fire," Virginia said. "But it also needs a physical connection to the core to orient. If we overload the Wraith's reactor while it is docked with the Spire, the feedback loop will shatter the cannon. It will destroy the gate." "And us," Eddie said. "The explosion will wipe out everything in this chamber." "Yes," Virginia said calmly. "We die, but the homeworld lives. The Alliance lives." She looked around the bridge. "My crew is ready to die. Are you human?" Eddie looked at the door to the secure room where Mia was waiting. "No, I am not." "You are weak," Virginia snarled. "You cling to one life when a world is at stake." "It is not weakness," Eddie shouted, stepping into her personal space. "It is my daughter. I did not drag her halfway across the galaxy to blow her up in a suicide pact." "You dragged her here because you could not let go of the past," Virginia roared back. She grabbed Eddie by the collar of his flight jacket and lifted him off the deck. "You think you are the only one with ghosts. You think you are the only one who bleeds." She pulled him close, her golden eyes burning with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "You want to know the truth about Vega," she hissed. "Rowan set the trap, but I sprang it. I was the captain of the lead cruiser. I saw your transport. I saw the children on board. And when the order came to fire, I hesitated. But then my own sensors showed your Aegis firing on your own ships. I thought it was a trick. I thought you were sacrificing your own to flank us. So I ordered the volley." She shook him. "I gave the order that killed your squadron, Eddie Ward. I pulled the trigger. If you need a monster to blame, stop looking at the screen. Look at me." Eddie stared into her eyes. He saw the fire of the burning ships reflected there. He felt the cold metal of her armor against his chest. He should hate her. He should want to kill her. But in her eyes, he didn't see a monster. He saw a soldier who had been carrying the same stone in her heart for 5 years. He saw the same nightmares that woke him up screaming. "Put me down," Eddie whispered. Virginia snarled, but she lowered him to the deck. Eddie straightened his jacket. He looked at his hands. They were not shaking anymore. "Rowan pulled the strings," Eddie said quietly. "We were just the puppets dancing in the dark. If I kill you, he wins. If we die here, he wins." "There is no third option," Virginia yelled, slamming her fist into the bulkhead, denting the metal. "There is." The voice was soft, melodic, and completely out of place in the war room. Vara, the old Fenri priestess, stepped out of the shadows, and holding her hand was Mia. "Mia," Jessie gasped, running to her. "You should be in the secure room." "The door unlocked itself," Mia said simply. "The ship's computer, it feels the gate too. When I wanted to leave, the red lights on the lock just turned green. The ship let me out." She walked past her mother, past the giant wolf, and stood in front of the main viewport. She looked at the giant, terrifying spire. "It is crying," Mia said. "It is a weapon, child," Virginia said, her voice softening. "It does not cry." "It does," Mia insisted. She pressed her hand against the glass. "It is not a gun. It is a brain. It is the brain of the gate. And it is hurt. It remembers the fire. It remembers the screaming. That man." She pointed at the blank screen where Rowan had been. "He heard it. He made it crazy." Vera tapped her staff on the deck. "The logs," she croaked. "Look at the energy logs." Jessie ran to the science console. She pulled up the history of the interactions between the Wraith and the gate. "My God," Jessie whispered. "Look at this. Every time the energy spiked to critical levels, here, and here, it dropped back down instantly. These timestamps correspond to when Mia was near the artifacts. When she touched the life pod. When she touched the Wraith. The song child," Vara murmured. "She does not just hear the machine. She resonates with it. She is a dampening field." "The AI in the core," Eddie realized. "It is biological based, isn't it? That is why it needs a neural link." "It is ancient technology," Virginia nodded slowly. "Living metal. It is in pain. It is lashing out." "If we send the Wraith into fire," Eddie said, his mind racing, "it amplifies the pain. It fires the beam. If we destroy it, well, we die." "But if we heal it?" Mia asked, turning to look at her father. "If I talk to it, can I tell it to sleep?" "Absolutely not," Jessie said instantly. "It is too dangerous. Linking a child's mind to a weapon of mass destruction. It could burn her synapses out in a second." "It is the only way," Eddie said. He looked at his daughter. He saw the fear in Jessie's eyes, the doubt in Virginia's. But he also saw the calm certainty in Mia's. "I can do it, Daddy," Mia said. "It knows me. It called me." We need you. It wasn't calling you. It was calling me. Eddie knelt down. He took Mia's small hands in his. Mia, listen to me. This is not a game. If you go in there, it might be very loud. It might be scary. I am not scared, Mia said. I have you. Eddie stood up. He looked at Virginia. We are doing it, but not the way Rowan wants. He turned to Jessie. Jess, I need you to rig a sublink. Connect the secure comm station in the Wraith directly to the neural interface. I will fly the Wraith. I will take the physical load. I will hold the door open. And Mia, Jessie asked, tears streaming down her face. Mia stays here on the bridge, Eddie said. Wired into the remote console. She provides the signal. I provide the carrier wave. We do it together. It is madness, Virginia said. If the link is unstable, you will both be lobotomized. Then you better pray we are stubborn, Eddie said. 10 minutes later, Eddie was strapped into the cockpit of the Wraith. The fighter detached from the Iron Fang, drifting silently through the gray void toward the pulsating spire. Inside the helmet, the neural needles pressed into Eddie's skull. The pain was immediate, a white-hot spike that made him grit his teeth. Ghost 3 link established. Jessie's voice came over the comms. Signal is chaotic. The gate is fighting you. I feel it, Eddie gritted out. It wasn't just data. It was emotion. Pure, unadulterated rage. Burn, end, silence, pain. The thoughts of the gate battered against Eddie's mind like a physical storm. It is too strong, Eddie shouted. I cannot stabilize the connection it wants to fire. On the bridge of the Iron Fang, Mia sat in the captain's chair. It swallowed her small frame. A headset was placed over her ears. Mia, Eddie's voice crackled in her ear. Now baby, sing to it. Mia closed her eyes. She reached out with her mind, finding the jagged red lines of the machine's anger. And she began to hum. It wasn't a complex song. It was the lullaby Eddie used to hum to her when the thunder on Harbor 9 was too loud. A simple, 3-note melody. Hum, hum, hum. Inside the neural drift, Eddie felt the storm pause. The red rage faltered. A thread of blue light wove through the darkness. That is it, Eddie gasped. Keep going, Mia. It hurts, Daddy, Mia whispered. It is so sad. It misses the stars. Tell it the stars are still there, Eddie urged. Tell it we can go home. The spire outside began to slow its rotation. The violet light flickered, turning a soft, confused white. But Rowan was watching. From his command center on Terra Prime, the Admiral saw the telemetry change. The firing sequence was aborting. No, Rowan whispered. You do not get to walk away. He slammed his hand onto the override key. We have no choice. Initiate Protocol Omega. Bypass the stabilization lens and force the firing sequence. I don't care if it damages the core, just fire the damn gun. A surge of raw code slammed into the Wraith. Eddie screamed. The feedback was like a hammer blow to his brain. He is overriding us, Jessie shouted from the science station. He is brute-forcing the trigger. Mia! Eddie yelled, blood trickling from his nose inside the helmet. Hold on! I cannot, Mia cried out. It is screaming again. In the null chamber, the spire jerked. It began to spin faster. The energy built up to a critical point. It was going to fire. Virginia! Eddie screamed over the open channel. We are losing it! On the bridge, the Wolf Admiral made a choice. Sierra! She barked at her helm officer. Give me manual control of the maneuvering thrusters. Admiral. Do it! Virginia grabbed the yoke. Eddie, keep the channel open. Mia, keep singing. I am going to buy you a second. The Iron Fang, massive and crippled, fired its last reserve of maneuvering fuel. The giant ship lurched forward. What are you doing? Jessie screamed. Shielding the cub, Virginia growled. The Iron Fang drifted directly into the path of the spire's focusing lens. If it fires now, Virginia said calmly, it hits us. It will vaporize the ship. But the feedback will burn out the cannon before it hits the planet. No, Eddie shouted. Virginia, pull away. Finish it, Ghost 3, Virginia roared. Do not let my death be for nothing. The barrel of the superweapon began to glow, blindingly bright. Eddie looked at the weapon. He looked at the iron fang blocking the path. He felt Mia's terrified mind touching his. He had to choose, fire and kill Virginia, or do nothing and let Rowan win. No, Eddie whispered. We do not trade lives. Not today. He grabbed the manual controls of the Wraith. He didn't pull away. He didn't aim at the gun. He aimed at the iron fang. Mia, Eddie said, his voice calm. I am coming to you. Open the door. What door? The slipstream door. The one inside the machine. Open it now. Eddie slammed the throttle forward. The Wraith shot toward the iron fang, but at the last second he banked hard, diving between the flagship and the cannon. He placed his tiny fighter directly into the focal point of the beam. Take it, Eddie screamed, opening his mind fully to the gate. You want a pilot? Take me, but leave them alone. He surrendered to the connection. He didn't fight the AI. He embraced it. He showed it the pain of his leg, the pain of losing his wife, the fear of losing Mia. He showed the machine that they were the same. We are both broken, Eddie thought. The machine paused. Broken, the voice in his head echoed. It sounded like 1,000 voices. Broken. Then a small voice cut through. But we can be fixed, Mia. The blinding light of the cannon collapsed. It didn't fire outward. It imploded inward. The null chamber turned white. Eddie, Jessie screamed. Daddy, Mia cried. And then there was nothing but the sound of 1 billion tons of metal, sighing in relief. The blinding white light of the null chamber did not fade into darkness. Instead, it dissolved into a kaleidoscope of sensory data that felt sharper, colder, and more terrifyingly real than reality itself. Eddie Ward was no longer sitting in the cockpit of the Wraith. He was no longer a crippled shuttle pilot. He was whole. He could feel his right leg, flesh and bone, pressing against a rudder pedal that did not exist. He could smell the recycled air of his old fighter, the Ghost One. He could hear the rapid-fire chatter of a squadron that had been dead for 5 years. He was not alone in this headspace. He felt the presence of others' ghosts drifting in the neural current. He felt a sharp, metallic tang that tasted like discipline and suppressed fury, Virginia. He felt a soft, terrified warmth that smelled of old paper and tears, Jessie. And binding them all together was a bright, singing thread of pure innocence, Mia. The AI of the Vega Gate was not showing them a video file. It was pulling them into the raw, unedited telemetry of the past. It was showing them the truth. Look, Mia's voice whispered in their collective mind. Look at what really happened. The machine remembers. The scene solidified. The Vega sector 5 years ago. Eddie saw himself leading Ghost Squadron. They were flying a defensive screen. The order came through from command withdraw. Fall back to Sector 7. But in the memory, Eddie did not turn back. His sensors picked up a transponder signal. A civilian transport, the Starlight Hope, drifting dead in the water between the human and Fenry lines. It was carrying refugee children. Command, this is Ghost Leader, the memory, Eddie shouted. Negative on withdrawal. We have civilians in the kill box. We are going in. Belay that order, Ghost Leader, came the voice of Admiral Rowan. The asset is expendable. Pull back. To hell with you, Eddie growled. He signaled his wingmen. Ghost Squadron, form up on me. We are buying that transport sometime. In the neural drift, the present-day Eddie watched his younger self with a breaking heart. He had always thought he was a hero that day. He had always thought he was fighting a vicious enemy. But then, the perspective shifted. The viewpoint jumped. Suddenly, Eddie was looking through the amber-tinted tactical display of a Fenry cruiser. The smell of the air changed to the musk of the pack. He was Virginia. He felt her hesitation. He felt her claws digging into the command chair. She was looking at the same transport ship. "Captain," her weapons officer barked. "The humans are advancing. Orders." "They are shielding the transport, the memory," Virginia growled. "They are not attacking. They are protecting the cubs." Then a priority channel opened on Virginia's console. It was an encrypted frequency. A human face appeared. It was Jesse. The present-day Eddie felt a shockwave go through the link. Jesse, talking to the enemy commander in the middle of a battle. "Fenry Captain, the memory." Jesse spoke, her voice breathless. "This is Intelligence Officer Rowe aboard the Aegis. We do not want to engage. We are trying to evacuate the transport. Please, give us a window." Virginia's ears swiveled. She looked at the human woman. She saw the desperation. "If I hold fire, my superiors will execute me for treason," Virginia replied. "I have direct orders to secure this sector." "Then, miss," Jesse pleaded, "fire a suppression pattern. Make it look like a fight. We will deploy countermeasures to make it look like hits. Just give us 5 minutes to clear the zone." Virginia hesitated for 1 heartbeat. 2. Then she nodded. "You have 4 minutes, human. Make them count." The perspective pulled back. Eddie saw the choreography of the lie. Ghost Squadron wove through the stars, firing flares. The Fenry ships unleashed a barrage of plasma, aiming deliberately wide, targeting the empty void. It was a dance. It was not a war. It was 2 mothers, 1 human, 1 wolf, conspiring across the battle lines to save children. But then, the math failed. A stray gravitational eddy from the gate nudged a volley of Fenry plasma. Virginia watched in horror as the shot she had aimed at empty space drifted 2 degrees to the port. It slammed into Ghost 4 and Ghost 5. Eddie felt the impact as if it were his own body. He heard the screams of his friends. He felt Virginia's soul scream with them. "No, the memory." Virginia howled. It was a mistake. Chaos erupted. The fake battle turned real. And watching it all from the bridge of the flagship, Olympus, was Admiral Cade Rowan. "Interesting," the memory Rowan said. He was not angry. He was calculating. "The Fenry are holding back, and Rowe is compromising the operation. We cannot have peace breaking out, can we? We need a massacre." Rowan's hand moved to a console. He keyed in a code. "Detonate." In the debris field, hidden mines that had been seeded days before mines placed behind the human lines activated. The explosions did not come from the Fenry ships. They blossomed from the hulls of the Starlight Hope and the remaining ghost fighters. Eddie watched in horror as his squadron was vaporized from behind. He saw the transport ship break in half, spilling its precious cargo into the cold dark. "No!" the present-day Eddie screamed in the mindscape. It wasn't them. It was him. The memory swirled to its final devastating moment. The memory, Jessie, was on a shuttle docked with the crumbling transport. She found a baby in the cargo hold. The baby Mia was crying, but her cries were syncing with the hum of the gate. The energy readings were spiking. She is the key, the memory Jessie realized. She is triggering the gate. Jessie grabbed the child. She ran. She found Eddie, who had been pulled from his burning cockpit, barely conscious, his leg crushed. She shoved him into the last life pod. "Forgive me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You have to live. But I have to hide her." She slammed the button. Eddie's pod shot away. And then the gate spoke. The AI, torn between the agony of the battle and the strange, soothing resonance of the child, let out a psychic scream. It reached out for the one thing that made the pain stop. "We need you." It wasn't calling for a pilot. It wasn't calling for a hero. It was calling for Mia. The connection severed. Gasps filled the bridge of the Iron Fang. Eddie Ward fell to his knees, his hands gripping the edge of the console to keep from collapsing. The silence in the null chamber was no longer heavy. It was shattered. He looked up. His eyes, red-rimmed and wide, found Virginia. The giant wolf Admiral was leaning against the bulkhead, her head bowed low, her posture one of utter defeat. She was not a monster. She was a soldier who had lived with the guilt of an accident for 5 years, believing she was a butcher. Then Eddie looked at Jessie. She stood by the tactical table, her face wet with tears, shaking uncontrollably. She hadn't betrayed him to climb the career ladder. She hadn't stolen his daughter to hurt him. She had saved his life. She had saved Mia. And she had borne the hatred of the man she loved for 5 years to protect them both from the monster who pulled the strings. "You," Eddie croaked, his voice cracking. "You tried to save them." Virginia lifted her head. "It was a suppression pattern," she whispered, her voice a ragged growl. "I ordered my gunners to fire wide, to create a wall of fire so you would be forced to turn back. I aimed for the void, Eddie, but the gravity well, it curved the plasma. It pulled my warning shots right into your hull. 2 of them. That is on my soul. Forever." "And Rowan killed the rest," Eddie said, standing up. The prosthetic leg whirred a sound of mechanical defiance. "He mined the field. He shot us in the back." He walked over to Jessie. She flinched, expecting another accusation, another scream. Instead, Eddie wrapped his arms around her. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her hair. "I am sorry," he sobbed. "I am so sorry, Jess. I did not know." "I wanted to tell you," Jessie wept, clutching his flight jacket. "Every day. I wanted to tell you, but he was watching. He would have killed Mia." "He is not killing anyone else," Eddie said. He pulled back, his eyes dry now. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. He turned to the main screen. The image of the gate's core was still pulsating, but the angry violet light was fading, replaced by a confused, swirling gray. "Mia," Eddie said into the comms channel. "Are you still there, baby?" "I am here, Daddy," Mia's voice came back. She sounded tired but strong. "The machine, it stopped screaming. It is just crying now." "Can you talk to it?" Eddie asked. "Can you tell it that the war is over?" "I can try," Mia said. "But it is scared of the bad man. The man with the cold voice." "Leave the bad man to me," Eddie said. "You just sing, Mia. Sing the song." On the bridge, Mia closed her eyes. She placed her small hand on the interface console. She didn't think about coordinates or energy yields. She thought about the nights on Harbor 9 when the storms were loud, and her father would sit by her bed humming a tune he learned from his own mother. She hummed. Hum-da-da-hum. The sound was amplified by the ship's systems, fed directly into the neural link of the Wraith, and from there, into the heart of the Star Eater. The obsidian spire in the center of the null chamber began to vibrate, not with the violent shake of a weapon charging, but with the gentle shudder of a machine powering down. The blinding light at the tip of the cannon dimmed. The targeting locks on the Fenry homeworld disengaged. But on Terra, Prime Admiral Rowan was not listening to the lullaby. "Malfunction," Rowan snapped, watching his readouts turn from green to amber. "Why is the firing sequence aborting? I have total override control." "Sir," his technician stammered. "The external signal is rewriting the targeting logic. It is a biological overwrite. The weapon it is going to sleep." "Wake it up!" Rowan roared. He slammed his fist onto the master control panel. "Initiate the Omega Pulse Force, the energy back through the link. If I cannot fire it, I will overload it." He typed in the command sequence. Override, force fire. In the null chamber, the spire jerked awake. A crack of black lightning arced across its surface. "Daddy!" Mia cried out. "He is hurting it again." "Hold the line, Mia," Eddie shouted. Rowan pushed the energy output to 120%. He was trying to force a river of antimatter through a garden hose. The gate's AI, confused and in pain, looked for a path of least resistance. It felt the gentle, soothing song of the child on one side, and it felt the brutal, burning spike of Rowan's command on the other. The machine made a choice. It rejected the pain. "Warning," the computer in Rowan's bunker announced. "Energy reflux detected. The carrier wave is reversing." "What?" Rowan froze. The beam is not projecting outward, Admiral. It is traveling back up the command link. Rowan looked at the screen. The violet light was not coming from the gate anymore. It was coming from his own console. The keys began to glow. The air in the bunker began to ionize. "No," Rowan whispered. "That is impossible. I am the architect." "You are the blockage," Eddie's voice cut through the speakers in Rowan's office. It was not a transmission. It was the AI speaking with Eddie's voice. "Goodbye, Admiral." The energy of a dying star meant to incinerate a civilization found its way home. The bunker on Terra Prime didn't just explode. It was erased. A column of violet light erupted from the surface of the planet, piercing the atmosphere. It was a surgical strike delivered by the laws of physics, punishing hubris. The base, the records, and the man who wanted to rule the galaxy turned into stardust in a fraction of a second. In the null chamber, the spire went dark. The violet light vanished. The oppressive weight of the gravity well lifted. The gate was dead. Or rather, it was finally resting. But the chamber itself was unstable. Without the energy of the core to hold the pocket dimension open, reality was crashing back in. "Collapse imminent!" Virginia shouted, leaping back into the command chair. "The bubble is popping. We have 3 minutes before this pocket folds in on itself." "Engines are offline," the helmsman yelled. "We have no navigation." "I have navigation," Eddie said. He was still in the Wraith, hovering in the void. "Mia, can you hear the exit?" "Yes," Mia whispered. "I hear the wind. It is that way." "Upload the coordinates to my nav computer," Eddie ordered. "Then patch it to the fleet." "The path is too narrow for a capital ship," Virginia argued. "We are flying blind through a collapsing wormhole." "You are not flying blind," Eddie said, banking the Wraith around. "You are following the wolf, or in this case the ghost." He gunned the throttle. "Form up on my wing, Admiral. Do not lag behind." The Iron Fang, groaning under the strain, fired its maneuvering thrusters. The Aegis followed. The 2 massive warships tucked themselves behind the tiny black fighter. "Punch it!" Eddie yelled. They shot forward. The gray mist around them began to tear. Cracks in reality appeared, revealing the cold vacuum of space beyond. The tunnel was twisting, turning, collapsing. Eddie flew like a man possessed. But he wasn't flying with his hands. He was flying with Mia's song. She was the radar. She was the compass. Left, dive, roll. The commands appeared in his mind as melodies. Eddie danced the Wraith through the chaos, and the massive warships mirrored his every move. It was a ballet of survival, human fenry, and machine moving as one organism. A wall of white light loomed ahead. The exit. "Brace for transition," Eddie shouted. They hit the light. Silence. Then stars. Real stars. Dust. Debris. The fleet burst out of the Vega gate, tumbling into normal space. Behind them, the massive ring of the gate shuddered one last time. The violet cracks faded to dull black. The hum stopped. It was just a piece of metal floating in space again. "We are out," Jesse breathed, slumping against the console. "Report," Virginia barked, though her voice was shaking. "All ships accounted for," the comms officer said. "We are alive." On the view screen, the Wraith did a slow victory roll. "This is Ghost 3, Eddie's voice came over the channel. "Requesting permission to land. My passenger wants a juice box." Virginia threw her head back and let out a howl. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. And for the first time in history, the human crew on the bridge didn't flinch. Some of them even cheered. The hearing took place 2 weeks later on the neutral station of Zenith Point. It was less of a trial and more of a formality. When Jessie Rowe took the stand, she didn't just testify. She dismantled the entire corrupt infrastructure of the previous administration. She laid out the data logs, the secret recordings, the truth about the friendly fire. The council was stunned. The public was outraged. The narrative of the heroic Admiral Rowan shattered overnight, replaced by the image of a warmonger who had tried to play God. When the question of treason was raised regarding her cooperation with the Fenri, the High Council of the Alliance looked at the Fenri delegation. "She is not a traitor," Admiral Virginia stood up, her voice booming in the Great Hall. "She is a pack mother who protected the young. If you charge her, you charge me." The charges were dropped. Mia sat in the front row, swinging her legs. The council officially designated her a Class 1 protected asset, a sterile term that basically meant she was untouchable. No more labs, no more hiding. She was free. After the gavel banged, Eddie and Jesse walked out onto the balcony overlooking the starport. It was awkward. The adrenaline of the survival was gone, leaving the messy reality of their past. "So," Eddie said, leaning on the railing, "you are a hero again." "I am a whistleblower," Jesse corrected, lighting a cigarette, a habit she had picked up again. "There is a difference. I will be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life." "You have a wolf admiral watching your back," Eddie grinned. "I think you will be fine." He looked at her. "Jess, about us." "I know," she said softly. She reached out and took his hand. It wasn't romantic. It was the grip of a teammate. "We can't go back, Eddie. Too much water, too much blood." "Yeah," Eddie nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief. "But we can move forward. Mia needs her mom. And I need a co-pilot for the parenting thing. I am terrible at math." "You are," Jesse laughed, wiping a tear. "Friends." "Co-parents," Eddie corrected. "And friends. But you are paying for her flight school." 6 months later, Harbor 9. The station had been repaired. The scorch marks from the Fenri arrival were gone, painted over with fresh primer. But Bay 5 was different. It had been expanded. It was now a designated joint diplomatic and commercial dock. It was the only place in the sector where a Fenri warship could park next to a garbage scow without anyone drawing a weapon. A small ceremony was taking place near the airlock. Eddie stood in his flight suit, clean-pressed but still worn. Mia stood next to him, wearing a dress she had picked out herself. It was bright yellow and clashed with everything. Jesse was there in civilian clothes, and Virginia was there. She towered over the crowd, wearing a ceremonial sash over her uniform. "This is ridiculous," Virginia muttered, twitching her ear. "A plaque for a parking spot." "It is history," Eddie said, nudging her with his elbow. "Read it." Virginia looked at the polished brass plate bolted to the wall. Mia had dictated the text, and Eddie had insisted they keep it word for word, refusing the station manager's edits. It read, Bay 5. "Here on this spot, a tired pilot with a bad leg, a wolf admiral who was soaked like a wet rat, and a kid who sings to metal, decided not to shoot first. They saved the galaxy. Be nice to your neighbors." The crowd of humans and Fenri dock workers burst into laughter. Virginia chuffed, shaking her head. "Soaked like a wet rat," she grumbled. "I will never live that down." "It adds character," Eddie grinned. The crowd dispersed, heading to the newly opened Wolf and Whistle Bar down the corridor, a joint venture between a human bartender and a Fenri chef. Virginia and Eddie lingered by the viewport, looking out at the stars. "So," Virginia said, "the Empire is recalling the Third Fleet. Rotation duty. You are leaving." Eddie felt a hollow spot in his chest. "I am an admiral," Virginia said. "I go where the ships go." She paused, her golden eyes sliding toward him. "But I have requested a permanent liaison office be established here, at Harbor 9, to oversee the integration." "Integration," Eddie repeated. "Is that what we are calling it?" "Someone has to keep you out of trouble, Ghost 3, she said. She reached out. Her hand, large and clawed and deadly, hovered for a moment. Eddie didn't flinch. He reached out and placed his hand against hers, palm to palm, skin to fur. It wasn't a kiss. It was something more grounding, an anchor. "I will be here," Eddie said softly. "Flying the shuttle, keeping the music playing." I know, Virginia said. Her fingers closed gently around him for a second. I will hear you. She turned and walked toward her shuttle, her tail held high. Eddie watched her go, a smile lingering on his face. Dad, Mia ran out of the shuttle second chance. She was holding something in her hand. It was the model of the Vega gate she had made out of foil months ago. Hey, kiddo, Eddie said, picking her up. Ready to go home? Yeah, Mia said. She looked at the foil ring. It was crinkled and bent. It is just a toy now, isn't it? She asked. Just a toy, Eddie confirmed. Mia laughed and tossed it into the air. It spun, catching the light of the station before Eddie caught it with his prosthetic hand. He walked over to the viewport. Far out in the distance, the Vega system was just a speck of light. The gate was silent. A scar on the universe healing slowly. Eddie touched the cool glass. He thought of Johnny. He thought of the squadron. For 5 years he had spoken to them with apologies. Today, he spoke to them with pride. We lived, boys, he whispered to the reflection of the stars. We lived. Not to fight another round, but to make sure no one else has to. You didn't die for nothing. You died so the door could stay open. He turned back to the dock. Mia was already running ahead, chasing a Fenry technician who was trying to carry a crate of supplies. Jessie was laughing, talking on her comms. Virginia's shuttle was firing its engines a familiar, comforting roar. We need you, Eddie whispered the words to himself. He realized now, it wasn't a command. It was a promise. He zipped up his jacket, adjusted his leg, and walked into the noise of the living.